talks room is Larry Knowles, who's going to talk to us about the ethics of wild harvesting in Northern California. And we are here in Northern California, where Larry has been doing business with seaweed since 1981. So he has perspective on the developing field and what we thought was going to happen when seaweed growth back in the 80s and came back again. And I'm overjoyed to have Larry speaking now. And we'll also have this recorded on and archived on our YouTube channel because it's a very important conversation.
It will be a conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, again, my name is Larry Knowles, and I own Rice and Spicy Vegetables, and we operate on the Mendocino coast, which is, of course, what is this? 150 miles north of here, whatever it is.
Close to
We're actually one of 4 businesses. The seaweed harvesting on the Mendocino coast, or really in Northern California, I'm sorry, started in 1980 by a man named John Wallen, who started Mendocino Sea Vegetables. And then my business was started in 1981. There are a few other businesses who started a little bit later, like in fact, Andrew of Pacific Wildcraft is in the back. When did you guys start, Andrew? 2000. Yeah, so 2000. Ocean Harvest started. When do you know? Hey, Andrew, do you know when Ocean Harvest started?
Sometime in the no, I don't. Sometime in the 90s.
Well, yeah. So these are really these are the main commercial seaweed businesses who've been wildcrafting seaweed sustainably since 1980. John Wallen passed away. Mendocino Sea Vegetables, as far as I know, really isn't doing any business. Can you confirm that, Andrew? Do you know?
Can't confirm.
Yeah. But so really who we are on the Mendocino coast is every business who started on the Mendocino coast didn't start because of the money, because like it's really a challenge to come up with a business that can sell seaweed. And so these businesses have been developed over a period of many years that have gradually grown. And we've developed these agreements that are really geared toward seeing what we can harvest, what our sustainable supply is of any particular species, and how we can basically make sure that we're giving the room for the other businesses to do what they do. So it's it's been a very organic process, including, little tugs and pushes like, oh, wow, we've been harvesting there and like you guys are harvesting there. And how can, how can we make this work? Okay, So that's all part of this process that we've gone through over the last, was it 40 years now? And so that's kind of the context of what we have been up to up there. And it's really, this industry really started because people were really getting into the non-tri. In fact, to back up, I also want to acknowledge, first of all, that we are harvesting on unceded tribal lands of quite a few different tribes, from mostly Mendocino County up into Humboldt into Del Norte. So, that's something that really has to be honored, is that history. But anyway, so as a group, we've been in process with seaweeds and coming up with these business plans according to what we think we can harvest. So, okay, like I think I was looking the other day at some early Marine Life Protection Act materials that we put together as a Seaweed Stewardship Alliance, these businesses. And I saw that we actually, between all the businesses, we're harvesting about 14 different species. And like, for instance, my business only harvests 4 different species. And we have products developed for those 4 different species. And so So like, for instance, this is me at a demo in a store with a few of our products. This is a snack product that we produce. That's called Chinani, that has sesame seeds in it. And maple syrup, rice syrup, and kelp granules. And the reason we do that is so that we can extend the finite resource that we have. Because really, all of us are thinking about how can we harvest and have a business and not and keep the ecosystems healthy, make sure that we're providing an intact ecosystem for human and non-human communities. So like we really, really think about that hard. And I would say that's just really a core value. It's been there since the beginning, and I really appreciate that, like providing healthy food, making sure it's done sustainably, learning along the way, watching the ecosystem over the last 40 years, and really coming to kind of understand what we can do in that ecosystem. And I've got to say that it's like for everybody out there, those ethics are really strong, and it makes it really clear when you're out in these ecosystems that we live in a finite planet. And so observing these growth patterns is really something that's been a huge learning experience for me. It's just watching the same bed. We go into, every business has particular beds that they'll be harvesting, and they'll be going out there once a year, maybe twice a year, but just harvesting a given area only once a year and only taking a small percentage of biomass. So that's the business model that we've been running on, all of these businesses. Let's see, where am I here?
Clicker on your right.
So we produce products. Also, Rising Tide in particular, like part of our business model is we love our local community. So this is our kitchen. We actually operate a shared use commercial kitchen in Fort Bragg. So it's a small business incubator kitchen to really support the local specialty food businesses. And so this is actually my lovely wife, Erica, and a person, Brell, who worked with us for years, making our Chinami snacks, our sesame snacks. And so in this kitchen, after we're out of here, then Wilder Kombucha might come in and make 80 gallons of kombucha after we're out of it. So that's part of this whole model around how can we create sustainable food systems that really have to be local. I mean, it's really, I think, clear to everybody in this room that global food systems really don't work well. It's decentralized food that doesn't have to travel a long way, that ultimately is going to get us where we need to be as far as a carbon footprint. So so that's that. And so what I'll do now is show you a little bit of what we do out there. So this is an intertidal. So we're harvesting intertidal seaweeds, and that's me with Laminaria seychellii, what we call kombu. And I've got my inner tube right there, and I'm just out there in this beautiful morning. We go at about dawn because we're after the low tides, these wonderful minus tides. We're accessing the intertidal zone during the minus tides. And I'm gonna cut maybe 40 pounds into that bag and this on this particular day. You can see there's bull kelp. If you were in one of the earlier presentations, they were talking about how bull kelp can be growing in deep water, grow in shallow water. So this is bull kelp that at high tide would be in about 8 feet of water, and it'll go through its full reproductive cycle in there. And actually, in fact, a lot of the bull kelp that hasn't been showing up in forests has really been intact in the just subtidal and the intertidal zones, even through the big urchin barren and deeper water. A lot of these areas are intact, and there are lots of intertidal areas with really great diversity on Mendocino and actually in Del Norte, Humboldt County, there's not as much an issue with urchin barrens. In fact, there's very little issue in Humboldt, Del Norte County with urchin barrens. It's really Sonoma, Mendocino, where that's kind of ground zero. And so anyway, so we're gonna be like with my business, we're out there doing this. There'll be 3 other people around here. That's me. And a typical day, for instance, so I'll go ahead and hit the next slide here. And it says, okay, so we're right here harvesting Lemonaria sicilii, or what we call kombu. And you can see this patch, this is all kombu out here. And when we harvest this, we cut it, leaving, you can see it's growing here, it's growing, it's getting a lot of wear in here. Well, I'll cut it like this, leave at least that much on this plant. It's going to grow out of that scar. And then I'll trim some off of it and then put it in the bag. And the idea is that we'll cut here, getting some of the plants that are right on top, and we'll end up with a big area underneath. You can see under the water there are a lot of intact plants that we'll never touch. And the idea is that we're going to bring, at the most we'll cut 25%. I'd say usually we're ending up cutting about 5% of the biomass when you consider we're just kind of getting this upper layer. The question I have is, once we cut some of these upper guys, does that actually promote growth because you're letting more sun into these lower guys? And I don't have the answer to that, but that's the idea. So when we harvest, we're out here with about 4 people usually, and we're cutting this stuff, getting about 18 of these bags like you see here that each weigh about 40 pounds. And again, just making sure that we don't get too big a portion of the plants, so we're just cutting a small percentage of the plants out here. And we come to these beds year after year, and they have a just amazing capability of regenerating. Okay, so that's the beginning of our day. So we're out, that was harvesting kombu. And by the way, I said a couple of things that were kind of like, this didn't get edited. I made these, I put these numbers in there. Those numbers are really kind of like, did I really say that? Really what we're doing when we're out there, I threw out these like couple numbers, okay, 20% of biomass, 5% of biomass. I mean, really, I'm not even sure why I said that, because really the idea is that we're really doing not more than 25% of the plants are we cutting. And we're trying to really leave this area with very little impact so that it remains a really vital ecosystem. And so that all kinds of critters can continue to use it. If anybody else wants to, like, somebody from recreational tribal wants to come in, there's tons of stuff they can use, they can eat, or tons of stuff that they can harvest, lots and lots. And for this particular seaweed, you'll notice how, in at least our business, I'm actually not sure exactly how some of the other businesses harvest, but we actually cut maybe 2/3 of the fronds off so that the plant continues to be draping down, continues to grow, and it'll grow out of that scar. And that also helps the aesthetic, because I love aesthetics, so that it doesn't end up just, if we cut the whole thing, if we're cutting, even if we're just cutting a small portion, once we cut the whole fronding blade off, it'll pop up. And so it'll all of a sudden be all in little pop-ups, and it's like, nah, aesthetically this like isn't good. I don't want people to have to come and see evidence of us being there. So that's one of the other ethics that really everybody has in this industry. And so we would be out here at dawn. This is probably about 6 o'clock in the morning. And probably 8 o'clock, we would be out of the water, the tide's starting to come in, this tide might have been a -2. And so at that point, we just get all the bags up onto the beach. And then we start another process, which is putting it into wheelbarrows and hauling it uphill. So, I know Andrew knows exactly where this is. But in any case, these are what Rising Tide does for how we transport. So each one of these are my compatriots. I actually have the senior discount, so like this wheelbarrow weighs about 230 pounds, that wheelbarrow weighs about 230 pounds. That wheelbarrow weighs about 230 pounds. That wheelbarrow that I'm gonna push weighs about 175. So like, I can't like, do what I used to do, but anyway, so it's definitely a workout. Just and a background on this, because we're in the northern waters, it's a very seasonal thing. So these seaweeds are annuals. Everything that we're harvesting intertidally is an annual. So in this particular case, I think probably every seaweed that every business harvests is an annual. Don't you think, Andrew? Is that?
Macrocystis in the south.
Yeah, but we don't have macrocystis. I mean, Bull Hill is actually now closed for any take. So, people, we don't take Bull Hill. And I think, Andrew, you have been, right? And there's one other business in Mendocino County that's affected by the closure. But it's also considered an annual, although it does overwinter, and it will, in this kind of aberrant life cycle, certain portion of the plant-like structures will actually restore in a subsequent year, and that's a really interesting phenomenon. But in any case, so this is a seasonal thing. We're going out during the minus tides. We've got about 5 days in a row. All the businesses are really limited by that minus tide cycle. And we'll harvest starting, I know we start harvesting in mid-April or so. Maybe 1st of May, some of the early seaweeds. The seaweeds are in their prime. They come into their prime in May, June, July, and then they start to get to their reproductive phase, because really what they're doing is they're wanting to get as big as possible in the middle of the summer when there's tons of light. They've been taking advantage of the upwelling process that's been happening in the springtime, and they're getting to the state where there's big biomass, and then they start doing what all organisms love to do. They start reproducing. So that's when they start. That's kind of the rough draft. That's not the case of all of them, but that's especially the brown seaweeds. That's kind of what they're after doing. Pyrophia or nori isn't quite that way, but in any case, so now we got to get this stuff up to the truck and into the truck, and then get it back to the drying yard so that we can dry it. And so this is an example of that same seaweed kombu drying on Rising Tides drying racks. I know some people do a lot of hanging, but we really can't do much hanging on the coast because we have to actually take it in. People who dry inland have the luxury of doing more hanging. Like I assume, Andrew, do you do more hanging than we do? Yeah, because we actually have to move it and finish it out. We've got a solar drying room. It's a 10 by 12 skylight facing south with solar mass in it. So on a 65-degree coastal day, our drying room will be 70. So this will be out here all afternoon and get pretty much dry. But then we use dehumidifiers and fans to get it just a little drier so we can bag it the next day. And then we do the same process. So we're bagging the seaweed. The next day we're going out getting another load, and we're doing that about 5 days in a row. So that happens for us, that happens about 30 times a year. That we do about 30-35 harvests a year. And this is a picture of sea palm, and sea palm is such an iconic seaweed to me. And what's so sea palm grows really high in the intertidal zone. And what's so amazing to a lot of people is that this stuff just gets battered by waves. It only grows where it gets hit by the full force of the open ocean swell. And so when we harvest it, as like Andrew can attest, we're also out in the full force of the open ocean swell. And it takes a while to like figure out when you should be there and when you shouldn't be there. And when you shouldn't be there, you really get like, okay, I really shouldn't be here. Because you really have to monitor the weather. It can be really, really dangerous. But this, if you've seen Josie Islin's work, you can see just how vital this stuff is. And the thing that's just kind of like my little tangent off of this is when especially with sea palm, when I'm out there, I just get this sense of this amazing vitality. I mean, like these guys are getting bashed by waves, every 8 seconds, let's say, for hours, all through their whole life cycle, starting when they're starting to grow in February, all the way through to when they start to die off. They're going to be in heavy reproduction mode in like July. And there's this, all I can say is it looks like desire. And, and I think about myself, I have all this desire in this life cycle, like, and the whole desire to go through this life cycle is something that really appears to me to be happening here. Like, you don't just like hang out in the waves all your life and not have some reason to do that. And so, this is my little sidetrack into something that's bigger than the physical, because having a relationship with these plants has really given me this sense of the sentience of all organisms that I really like. I really don't know what's going on there, but like they're really doing this thing. I mean, like they're serious about this thing, and I have no idea what that means. Anyway, that's and this is a picture of us cutting sea palm. And, I'm just going to speak to rising tide. So the guidelines in the California regulations say that we should be leaving about an inch of frond on here that is on the rib section of this plant. And that's because of the really critical reproductive cycle that this has. And so this is something that is kind of up for a lot of attention and debate within the regulatory agencies. And because sea palm drops its spores directly onto the rock at low tide, it even times its spore dropping to be at low tide to drop right down here. If we were to just start blocking these off right here, I would say we locked off this whole area, and they're dropping their spores with a little breeze, like in this little patch right in here, then basically, and they haven't successfully dropped spores by this time, then we could potentially completely, when we did that to this whole bed, this bed would, good chance, be completely bare next year. I mean, it would just be gone. And I can't, that's a concern based on the science that was actually done at the Knowles Fish and Wildlife Knowles Field Station many years ago to kind of confirm what the life cycle of this is. So when we're cutting, what rising tide does, also because we harvest in state parks a lot, and in areas where people are going to see it, we actually leave like 4 inches or kind of whatever we can to make sure that these guys have a lot of rib section left. And that what that means is we're probably cutting more plants than we would, but we're just wanting to make sure to leave a lot of that surface area, because it's really surface area on those rib sections that are drop spores. So that's how we do that. And this is a photograph of us harvesting nori. All this has already been harvested. So this is an area where we've already gone through it and we're ready to leave. And we won't enter this area again. So the idea is to leave lots of biomass with nori or pyropia. It's really in the high intertidal, not in the same place as sea palm, but it really hides a lot of invertebrates in here. And so there's a lot of risk of desiccation if we take too much. And so like, and also predation, you know, so like if we were to just strip these rocks, even not thinking about nori reproduction, or just kind of help with the ecosystem, there would be a lot of invertebrates that wouldn't have feed. There would be a lot of potential predation by shorebirds who just come through, and these guys wouldn't have. The interesting thing is nori, when it dries, it's really designed itself, it's evolved so that it actually creates these hard mats when it dries. And so it'll be out, because it grows so high, it'll be out in the air for on a hot day for 4 hours, 5 hours. And the water will come in and it just basically instantly just completely transforms into this amazingly vital thing. I mean, it's just kind of the most remarkable thing. Like if you just walk by, I mean, this is dead stuff. And so that hardening shell, as I've looked at this for years and years, I've realized that hardened shell prevents the birds from coming in and opening it up to get to the invertebrates. And that's something that I've just noticed. And I'm really curious if anybody here has studied pyropia and observed that, like, because that's something that I've noticed in the last year. So that's like another really important reason for us to leave a lot of cover here. I mean, other than the basic fact that we can't take, if we're good stewards, we can't take very much biomass out of here. That's just not what a good steward does. And then with nori, just kind of an interesting little footnote, is because of where nori grows, it grows in these areas where it gets sanded in. And so it has to go through its particular reproductive cycle. It starts to spore early in its life cycle, so that it can spore. And one of the questions that I have, it's really fascinating. This might be a question and answer for me to the audience, if somebody knows the answer. But is, you know, where do these spores hang out? Because a lot of times when this is pretty young, it'll be covered with sand. And then the next year, you know, it's back completely dense. So it's kind of, okay, where are the other cycles of that red seaweed hanging out? And I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer to that. You know, the research says that they like calcium carbonate, or they hang out in shell matter and sand. You know, who knows? I don't know. So there's that. And just to kind of circle back onto something. So like we have this nori area that we harvest, and we harvest a really small amount of this nori. Recreational people might come in, the tribes might want to come in, but the commercial harvesters were really, because we take more biomass than either the tribes or recreational, we're really careful to like have only one of us go in an area which it's really clear that it can't support more than one business. So we really are careful about respecting who's doing what bid and not stepping on each other's toes. There is one location where like Andrew and I harvest there year after year because there's so much biomass of alaria that it's just like off the charts, and we can just be, you know, a quarter of a mile away over there, and we're a quarter of a mile away over there, and it all works. But you know, that's how we kind of think about that whole thing. And then this picture, if you were at Josie Islin's presentation on Friday, was taken by a guy, Ron Valley, who actually was a really well-respected biologist on the Mendocino coast and mainly an ornithologist. And he's worked with us a lot he passed in June, unfortunately. He got Parkinson's, which is very tragic. But he really worked with us to address some of the issues of how do we deal with conflicts with shorebirds, and how do we act in the presence of some sensitive species, and and where should we be, where shouldn't we be? And so, I wanted to put this in there also because I wanted to honor Ron. And then also for anybody who was, so this is a quiz for anybody who wasn't there Friday night. Okay, right, got it. So you're disqualified, like you're not eligible if you're there Friday night. But the question is, what year was this photo taken?
2008.
Yeah. And does anybody else know why he knows it was 2008?
Of course.
Yeah, so this was 2008 was like the best of the best of the dense year of the maximum capacity of Nereocystis or bull kelp. I mean, it was just when you see all the maps of the die-off, this is the year that they're saying this is like the banner year, and bull kelp is a very cyclical seaweed, so it's a little misleading to actually measure off of 2008 because it was also a bumper year because it does fluctuate. I mean, and I'm not denying like bull kelp is in serious trouble and the urchin barrens are real, and we're just lucky that we started all of our business really not relying too much on bull kelp. I mean, we didn't at all. We just happened to not develop bull kelp as a product or products for that, but it's that's a real thing. We'll see. It's actually there's been quite a bit of regrowth in the last couple of years. Not anything like this historical, but again, in a lot of these shallower areas, the bull kelp has been pretty intact, but it's not really in the mappable bull kelp areas like this is. This is in Van Dam, which really has done a lot of recovery in particular. That's that. And then also, we're involved with education. Like I've led seaweed walks. This is when I'm leading a walk for the Master Gardener program at the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens about seaweeds and algae that are growing offshore. So that's a really important component, really, of many businesses. Like Tanya in the back here actually has a business where she really leads seaweed walks. So she's active in Northern California, doing more education, doing camps, and that's all a big part of this whole thing. And I'm not sure, Andrew, have you done much seaweed walks stuff? Yeah. So like Terry Nieves of Ocean Harvest, or Terry DeSilke of Ocean Harvest also does seaweed walks and talks, and that's kind of a part of her business too. And Heidi Herman is at Seaweed County, also does more educational stuff. She's strong arm farm. And then this is my last slide. So the reason I'm leaving this slide as the last is if you look here, you can see like this is Congo or Laminaria cichilii, there's acacia, there's sea palm, there's bull kelp, there's surfgrass, there's what else is there in here? There's some reds I can't identify. And this is what we're all after keeping intact. I mean, like this is a vital ecosystem that's so critical to the planet that it's really important that we just steward these in a way that is going to help us keep these ecosystems providing their really important ecological services, because the ecological services that are produced in here from a vital ecosystem just have such an impact on all of the species who are in these areas in deeper water, and we're all dependent on it. So, I mean, that's what this whole conference is about, is stewardship. And if one of the questions what's coming up now is, we've never had a kelp management plan in California. Like there's something called fisheries management plan for particular fisheries. And we now have the funding to get the kelp management plan moving, right? I mean, isn't that true that we now have that? So Rebecca Flores Miller is actually a really great contact in Fish and Wildlife. And just, I think it was Thursday, wasn't it, that the funding actually came through with the tribal? Yeah, so a really exciting thing that's happening right now is that we're all excited that we're gonna finally have a more comprehensive kelp management plan for all of California, but us Northern California harvesters are excited about that. We're also excited because there's something that's very new that's been building its momentum called the Tribal Marine Co-Management Network. Did I say the name right? Tribal Marine Co-Management Net. Yes. So on Thursday, we attended the really kickoff for the Tribal Marines Co-Management Network in Sacramento, and Secretary Crowfoot was there. And the exciting thing was with it kind of at the same time as this kelp management plan got funded, the tribes got money to put into co-management. And it's a really exciting development, because I was a stakeholder for the Marine Life Protection Act in 2009, 2010. And really the tribal element just wasn't work. I mean, there was no mechanism within the Marine Life Protection Act to figure in tribal uses and to come up with ways to account for their traditional uses. And so what I actually saw on Thursday were some of the tribal members. I was on a stakeholder group when we were designing the marine protected areas for the northern part of the state, who were there and actually were some of the first tribes, first bands to start to sign on to this tribal marine co-management network. And these were people who are really discouraged during the Marine Life Protection Act. And they were there moving this forward, and and Secretary Crowfoot was there, and the funders were there, and they had basically decided the funding 4 hours earlier, that finally went through, right? And it was a really cool event because it made me really hopeful that there can be a much more collaborative process within marine management. So I'm just really pleased with that, and pleased that we have hope for these amazing ecosystems that we in the Seaweed Stewardship Alliance, that is our organization for Northern California that we started years and years ago, will be able to take part in and kind of help this process of making sure that we manage these ecosystems into the Anthropocene. So yeah, so anyway, that's my talk, and I'm hopeful that we'll come up with good management strategies and flexible management strategies. So, thank you all. So I think so do we have time for questions? I
You
guess.
can take a couple of questions.
Okay, yeah, so maybe 5 minutes of questions. Does anybody have questions? Okay, over here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your sensitivity as a harvester. It really shows. My question is about names. iNaturalist is listing the Seychellii as a common name, the southern stiff stipe.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it, kombu is a different genus in Japan.
Well, yeah, so there's interesting backstory.
My question that is generally, it's like, is it marketing? Because I feel like it happens in multiple, common species. And then my add-on is, why not use the indigenous name as common names?
Oh, interesting, yeah. And to start, I don't know the indigenous names, and I'm not sure there are, like in Mendocino County, we're harvesting on. Let's see, I think it's 3 bands of the Pomo, Kato, Yuki. So I actually don't know, and it's kind of hard because I don't know those names first of all, but getting back to your question, like just thinking of the seaweed industry. The backstory of this is that this industry in North America was started in 1972 by a guy named Shep Earhart in Maine. And this was a response to non-tribal, non-Asian people, like people who would have been not really familiar with seaweed, getting familiar with seaweed by an amazing guy named Michio Kushi, who started the macrobiotic movement. So we started branding in North America because Michio Kushi was such an amazing diplomat, really. And we started branding our seaweeds with the names kombu, wakame, mori, because they were recognizable to people who were then becoming familiar with the macrobiotic movement. There was the Whole Foods movement. I mean, I got into Whole Foods when I was like 13, and that whole thing, is kind of a lot of the genesis into this. So does that answer the question? Yes. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Perfect.
Yes. Also, my name is Meg. Good to
Hey,
see you
Meg.
again, Larry.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm wondering about the CDFW new management plan that you were referencing. Could you point me in a direction of where I might be able to find it online, perhaps?
Well, like. So most of it,
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
It's just like, it's just received a card before, and my colleague is doing that, and, sorry, I didn't work in that direction, but I'll look on it. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, I was gonna make like a joke so I could make Rebecca uncomfortable, who's really the contact person with California Fish and Wildlife. I was gonna say, well, it's gonna be done in another month, so it'll be easy to like it's like a 3 to 5 year process to do this whole thing. There's a lot involved with a fisheries management plan. In this case, it's a health management plan, and it promises to be like Yes, it promises to be a pretty complex process because there are a lot of species. Like, I think it'd be easier to just like do a salmon management plan, and that would be pretty complicated too. But like, I mean, I'm kind of picturing that like the first step is just like figure out the species, right?
Giant and bull kelp management.
Oh, okay. So what about the intertidal? Oh, what about the intertidal species that we harvest? Because that was one of the things that I was hoping. Oh, you're bursting the bubble.
For harvest and restoration and
Okay.
bringing a lot of people together, a lot of researchers and harvesters and stakeholders and tribes, and it's going to be a few-year process. It takes a while to develop a management plan, but very complicated. Restoration and have it all.
So what you're saying, Rebecca, as I'm understanding, is that it's really the management plan for giant kelp, Macrocystis and Nereocystis. And what I'm hoping, this is like what I'm hoping, I'm putting this out to like the agency right now, is that it would be great if we can somehow incorporate what we've been doing in Northern California with Nereocystis and all of the other species. Like, is there a way to do that's like my question for you? Like, is there a way to do
I mean,
that?
the management will consider the other species as it involves giant bull kelp. But, who knows, maybe later on, when they finish the giant kelp and bull kelp management plan, maybe we'll move on to another species. That's kind of my hope, actually.
Okay,
Management plan for at least one other.
I see. Okay, so okay, I'm gonna take this. Thanks.
I have a question, more related around business formation, and you mentioned about the collaboration and cooperation. across different companies. And I'm wondering, either in Mendocino or elsewhere, if you've seen the formation of actual cooperatives, either from a producing standpoint or from a marketing standpoint. So that the small community base is, you have more power.
That doesn't happen on the Northern California coast. We haven't formed cooperatives or, anything like that. It's more, coming up with understandings of how we're going to divide up the resource. In Maine, there's the Maine Seaweed Council. And in fact, Chef Earhart was the person who kind of initiated this whole thing. And in fact, Maine Coast Sea Vegetables is a cooperatively owned business now. They went through that process. Chef is retired, he's 80, he's retired. And so they're actually more, whereas the businesses on the West Coast, really we harvest and we process and we sell, we're like we do it all. Whereas Maine Coast is more of a model of, they have people who are harvesting who sell to them as their subcontractors, and they're really the marketing arm or the brand arm. They're the brand. And they've developed products since 1972. So that's that works. So yeah.
You mentioned harvesting 25% of the habitat.
No, that in that video I said 25% of biomass.
And I want you to.
Oh, okay. So as I said, like disregard, like why did I say this? I wish I could have edited that video, right?
You should have left the sound off.
Oh, yeah, right. And it's kind of like, that was like, we're doing this video out in the intertidal zone on harvest. And I'm thinking of a study I was actually at that point thinking of a study that was done by Oregon State University, where James Youngworth owns Nature Spirit Herbs in Oregon, who will harvest in Humboldt and Del Norte County, was involved with a study with the main species that we harvest and up in Oregon State University. And they found that if they cut 25% of the biomass in a given stand in the techniques that we use, that there was nothing noticeable that was happening in the ecosystem. There was good regeneration the next year. They couldn't see any hydrodynamic differences. They couldn't see, there was a minimal biomass loss as a result of cutting, and when I say cutting, they were specifically looking at this study with 25% of the plants cut, whereas we don't cut that much in this. And so that just kind of popped out of my brain, right? Because it's like 25 and like, and what's hard is like in a scientific setting, like 25 is a number. And then if I say the wrong word tagged on, all of a sudden it has a completely different meaning. So it's like, oh yeah, I said that, but I just don't have the time to edit this video. So thank you for that.
All right.
So yeah, thank you very much. Oh, well, okay, go ahead.
Just very final note, in grazing ecology, people say that grazing stimulates more vigorous growth because of the grazing.
Oh,
And, I don't think anyone's tried to answer whether that's true for algae, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it's interesting because,
Well, we don't know about big charismatic macroflora, but definitely the small ones. Yeah, it's good.
well, one thing that's interesting is part of that OSU study was around how does this mimic natural processes? Like, in other words, these are seaweeds that only grow in high energy intertidal zones. So in other words, there's a lot of wave action in here, and they require a lot of wave action and a lot of movement to exist. That's how they've evolved. And so they live with wear constantly. And so the idea with these studies was, well, are we mimicking natural wear? And the study concluded that yes, we are simply mimicking natural wear. We're kind of increasing natural wear to a certain percentage, greater percentage. So yeah, so that's, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.